Hi everybody, in today's video I'm going to be talking a little bit about how to publish a research paper. So I think most students often think when you come through a research paper, it often is impossible starting out. You often need years of experience, a senior faculty position, or a groundbreaking laboratory study. But in this video I'm going to show you that that's no longer true. And here's why. Most medical students and early career researchers are increasingly publishing in journals like Nature, JAMA, the British Medical Journal, and other journals like Nature Machine Intelligence. And this is often by identifying really important healthcare problems and by communicating them really on. So this is really mimicked in a lot of my own work. In addition to doing work in the wet lab, I often do a lot of dry lab research. So I do things in the field of oncology, AI in healthcare, health equity, and certainly in global cancer outcomes. And so, my publications have ranged from places like Nature, Nature Machine Intelligence, MPJ Digital Medicine, and the British Medical Journal Oncology. And most importantly, many of these journals often weren't in wet lab studies. They were often in dry lab studies. And a subset of these papers that I've published are often in the form of commentaries, narrative reviews, health system analysis, and policy-focused papers. And so today's video, I'm going to show you how you can do the same and hopefully publish your very first paper. And of course, this goes without saying, but if you want help to work with me and my very own research team and help with publishing your very own paper, please visit our website, Ivy League Consults, and book your free discovery call where you'll work with me and my team to find you and help you publish your very own paper. Now, in the first part of this, I really want folks to understand what modern medical publishing really looks like. And so I think, that was sort of the misconception that I talked about earlier, right? When students often think about a medical paper, they often imagine these randomized clinical trials or complex lab research or years of statistical analysis. But academic publishing is significantly broader than that. And so nowadays we're seeing increasingly more papers in the form of viewpoint articles, narrative reviews, policy commentaries, and health system analyses. So for example, one of my very own papers that was titled Understanding and Training the Large Impact of LLMs and AI in Health Practice was published in BMC Medical Education. And it focused not on the experimental research, but on how AI is reshaping clinical education and how it can be used to transform the same medical systems that we see in our school systems. Another paper that I similarly did, which was also a commentary and a perspective piece, was in Nature Machine Intelligence, a very highly regarded journal that argued that the FDA approval process must evolve to address AI equity in healthcare. And so in this paper, we really argued how to do that and the steps needed to overcome this barrier. And so it was really a policy argumentation that reflected a major shift in medicine today. And so this is really what I want to get at, right? Is the ability to synthesize evidence and communicate healthcare problems is just as effective, as valuable as generating raw data, right? They still get published in the same venues. Certainly there can be some differences in the journal rank, but you're still able to publish in these very highly regarded journals and communicate important scientific information. Now, the first step into actually publishing a paper is to establish the right problem, right? So strong medical papers are often connected to emerging healthcare trends, policy debates, technological disruptions, or unmet clinical needs. And so, one very useful strategy that I like to think about is what is the public discussing, right, versus what the medical journals are discussing. So for example, if AI is becoming integrated into healthcare, many conversations focus on the efficiency and the automation, but many researchers recognize this as a deeper issue, right? So that's healthcare inequity, right? So what are the biases in those AI systems? How can we transform these AI systems to address the needs of society? What are the disparities in data representation? What is the unequal access in digital healthcare, right? So all of these are trends that we can actually use to go and construct a paper. I've written a number of papers that have looked at different disparities that new policies have come out and how AI policies need to reflect that or need to amend their current set of policies. Now the next part is to develop a strong argument. And so how do you develop a strong argument? So the idea to develop a strong argument is to develop a clear thesis, right? So weak papers simplify these very big problems, right? Strong papers, number one, they explain why the problems matter, they explain why existing systems fail, and they discuss what and why it should be changed, right? So I like to think about this three-part framework, right? Number one is to define the healthcare problem. Number two is to present the evidence. And number three is to propose actionable solutions, right? So, another example was when I had my paper in AI and critical care medicine. We didn't just explain why the technology didn't work. We analyzed the practical clinical risks, the implementation challenges, and proposed real-world solutions to actually see how this would be put in clinical practice. And so the strongest medical writings often have to do with evidence-based analysis, and we're proposing policies that were, often very novel or based on solutions that are very practical to be implemented. And so, now that you've sort of identified your problem, you have a really good basis for it. You should think about now structuring the paper, right? And so certainly you should have the introduction. And so in the introduction, you should establish very early on the urgency or the relevance of your central argument, right? And so the editor should be able to immediately understand, why this issue is important and why now is the right time for that. Now, the subsequent body paragraphs should really focus on supporting that initial introduction, right? So that should focus on either, kind of elaborating the healthcare policy or looking at statistics to support whatever the topic is, or it should look at additional studies towards implementing a clear thesis, right? And so, for example, I had a paper where we looked at global cancer burden. And so what we did in that paper was we first of all looked at the claim of cancer burden globally. We then did many statistical analysis to compare regional trends, and then we discussed the disparities therein and healthcare infrastructure solutions to help kind of mend the solution. And so, one of the most important things in all of these publications is finding the right mentors and collaborators. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we often see in academic medicine is that students need existing connections before they can publish. And that's really not the case, right? Many collaborators often begin with initiative, right? I remember early on when I was in high school and I wanted to publish a paper, I would reach out to many folks over email and I would ask them to be my mentor. And so this is a strategy that you very too can use as well in thinking about how to go about research, right? And so a strong approach is to, number one, establish a healthcare issue, develop a brief outline, and then find a research faculty in that area that you think would be really good at mentoring you through that, and then send them a concise professional message and ask them if they'd be interested in collaborating. I will say though that faculty members are more likely to respond when they see that there is preparation, there's independent thinking, and there's a genuine interest in the topic, right? So, we're thinking about many of the papers that I've collaborated on, right, in oncology, digital medicine, global healthcare, I've had a genuine interest for it. I've had, many years of experience. And so, I think faculty members regard that as genuine passion and are therefore more likely to collaborate with me. And finally, it's really important to discuss the reality of this whole process, right? Many papers and even outstanding papers often get rejected, right? In academic publishing, rejection is often the norm, right? Some papers are rejected multiple times before they eventually get published. The key difference between successful researchers and unsuccessful ones is the persistence, right? Peer review is not designed to discourage authors, but is rather designed to improve scientific communication, right? And so in fact, many of the most cited papers are often faced many rigorous scrupulations and were submitted multiple times before they eventually got published. And in fact, these reviews can be quite helpful because they can, outline things like, unclear arguments or weak methodologies or often unsupported claims. And so it's very helpful for experienced researchers to then treat this as a revision process and to constantly be thinking about how to improve the writing, how to improve the argumentation, but not as a failure. And certainly, academic publishing is changing quite rapidly today. It's no longer limited to senior academics working exclusively in healthcare or in laboratories, but it's young students and young researchers, very much like folks watching this video, can now contribute meaningfully to discussions involving AI, cancer outcomes, economics, and very wide range topics that we're seeing that are publishable. And so the key is to learn how to identify important problems, how to synthesize the evidence, and most importantly, how to propose fantastic solutions and communicate your ideas clearly. I hope this video helped you. Please subscribe if you're interested in learning more. And then again, please visit the link in the description where you can work with me and my team to help you publish your very own paper. Thank you again for watching and stay tuned for the next video.